you are an entrepreneur, and we're kind of getting into a space, an ecosystem where it's becoming easier. There's more groundswell, there's more momentum associated with people like yourself, doing corporate work, who are coming in and taking the challenge on of leading a movement and doing something new. And what better times until, than, in the COVID new normal, to really put on the bootstraps and do something different, do something that really has some meaning and is something that's powerful. So here you are winning these hackathons. You had this great idea. Other people thought so as well. What happened from there? How did you end up putting on the entrepreneurial hat? Did you join Mars right away to help start to incubate you and to start gestating and developing the next realm of what Pentavere is today? Tell us a little bit about the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So we didn't join Mars right away. What we did join was another incubator in Toronto called the Biomedical Zone in St. Michael's Hospital, Toronto. And we joined it at the same time that we came across a company that had a large repository of digitized health records that they had the rights to be able to use and do work on. And what was interesting about these health records is I would sort of classify them as the most unstructured, hardest data to actually lay the foundations of trying to solve a problem. So think about, hundreds of thousands of digitized PDF documents, different sources, different levels of quality. How can we get insights out of a corpus like that? And it was through working through that problem and then testing it out in these hackathons that we were onto something. So then the next step to your question was, how do we get it validated? For it's one thing to say, we won a hackathon and beat out some very, very established, prestigious players. It's another thing to say that a hospital will put their brand and their credibility on the validation of your technology. And the Biomedical Zone happened to be the only incubator of its type in Canada that was designed to do that. So it was a partnership between the university and St. Michael's Hospital. You're actually embedded in the hospital. And on top of general, call it business coaching, it was really around, we're going to immerse you in the complexity and joys of the healthcare system. But more importantly, we're going to sort of try to problem solve, how do we validate your technology? And we did that over the course of 1.5 years, 2 years. So very little to no revenue coming in, passionate about the problem, but had some mentors at St. Michael's Hospital and people like Dr. Mohammed Mamdani, people like Dr. Linda Maxwell, who said, let's set up a proper study to compare the output of your AI to if people manually reviewing, we're going to pull the information out of these records. And to give you an idea of what these records look like, I walk around, so you talk about data. So this is a printout of a single patient's electronic health record. 200 pages of all of the information you need to understand their patient journey. And manual abstractors go through that type of content today to make sense of it. So we did the test. We went through that validation. It's now published in a reputable journal, and we did phenomenally well. And it happened to be one of the life science companies that we were talking about, who today is one of our greatest supporters, best customers, innovative collaborative partners, who said, are you telling me you've created technology that can replace or augment manual chart review? And we said, we think so, but first speak to the clinicians who validated our study. And to give you an idea around scale, we went through, after tuning, our engine processed 85,000 patients, extracted 76 different variables in a day. It took a team of 5 people months to check a random sampling of under 1,000 records. Think about that, discovering and understanding patient outcomes, patient journeys, comorbidities from 85,000 patients. It's just not done today. And really, our client said, that's incredible. We want to test that with one of our current retrospective observational studies we have now at a major institution in oncology. And we did that, and it went really, really well. So much so that we've got abstracts into the American Society of Clinical Oncology. We presented 2 posters at a major forum, and it hasn't stopped from there.
So, Aaron, I just want to linger on that a little bit because there's a lot there, and there's so many great nuggets. So, just so we understand, the first validation that you did at St. Mike's with the I'm assuming these are electronic health records, or were these paper copies? So you were working with electronic health records, hundreds and hundreds of pages per patient, records. And so you're processing this through your company's algorithm called Darwin. So you built this algorithm. Now, when we talk about this algorithm, people are just going to want to understand kind of somewhat the dynamics without getting too complicated about neural networks and all those other things. But did you actually create, and I'm actually kind of alluding personally to a book I read called Prediction Machines. It's something else that speaks very much to these ideas about these templates, and that basically it reads things in a certain way and it kind of adds them into these boxes so that you can create form and function to something that's kind of amorphous and formless. Is that kind of a good description about what Darwin does, or can you explain it in kind of more layman's terms?
Sure. So it's not, because there isn't a single algorithm that can solve the problem. There isn't a single AI methodology that could solve the problem. So when you take a step back and you say, and especially referencing the book Prediction Machines, AI, which is in its very, very infancy, is a tool. It is a tool that dramatically lowers the cost to process and make sense of information that otherwise we as humans would do. So we broke down the problem to say it's about being able to curate specific clinical features in a way that can be validated against some form of ground truth that often in itself doesn't exist, because even within patient registries that are manually curated, there's variability often, most of the times, in that data for a whole slew of reasons. So without giving too much away, part of our approach is exactly the opposite of what you described. It's not one algorithm that will be that silver bullet to solve the problem, but how in some cases do thousands of different algorithms that span the spectrum of neural nets to possibly heuristic-based rules that some would not even consider AI work in synchronicity with each other at scale in order to enrich, curate data as a replacement or augmentation to the manual processes that occur today. And that is sort of at the anchor, the design of how we went about architecting technology to service or solve that particular problem.
So, Aaron, we hear a lot about unsupervised learning, or anyways, I'm a bit of a tech geek, so I've been reading about unsupervised learning and about smart learning and machines that basically teach themselves and all that. Is your technology based on this complex network of technologies, kind of like you said, you've curated them into sort of a problem-solving unit? Does it get smarter with time as it starts to gobble up the new gold of today, which is data? As it gets smarter with more and more data, does it self-learn?
So absolutely it does, but it self-learns at the feature level. And we're purposeful in that. So unlike, for example, Amazon, which is trying to boil the ocean, just throw all of your notes in and we will tag that. We work at the other end of the spectrum that says we want to curate specific features, usually tied to a protocol, and curate those features in such a way that the output is considered research grade, evidence grade, and positioning it so when the regulators say what types of real world evidence can be used for regulatory filings, can be used in certain cases as alternatives or augmentations to random control trial data. We are not a black box AI solution, but have all of the same standards, controls, audible functions built in to our AI workflow process that we meet that level of scrutiny.
That's fantastic. It sounds fascinating. So we've talked about the validation that's happened at St. Mike's. And so just so we understand the study that was actually done. So you did like a retrospective analysis of what Darwin is doing and the output, and then comparing it to a manual chart review that was done of these same patient reports. So at the end of the day, what was the metrics that you were using to determine which one was better or the same or the other? Was it speed to accessing the final outputs? I'm just assuming the word classifiers or tags or whatever those core things that you were trying to put information into specific, like you said, placeholders. Was it speed to getting there? Was it accuracy? Was it the number of classifiers that were able to be extracted from that? What were those metrics that one was able to use to compare manual at the St. Mike's sort of initial validation, the manual versus what Darwin was doing?
Yeah, so the bar was high. So, speed is not even a measure. I talk about 85,000 in a day versus months and months of manually going through charts to do, a subset of less than 1,000. The measure was accuracy, but very specifically, F1, your precision and recall, measuring also sort of the agreement or disagreement between two different reviewers with an adjudication process. So what was the kappa between two reviewers? What was the technology? And then a very structured, explicit adjudication process in order to get at a final, F1 specificity score. And we've got now a paper coming out soon. It's in pre-publication around work we're doing in cancer, where the features are things like biomarkers, location of metastases, first versus second line treatment. We take for granted that there's a uniform understanding for things like what is progression-free survival, what is pathological complete response, what is minimal residual disease testing. So extracting features like that and demonstrating uniformity and scale at the curation. So right now we are deployed at the provincial level in a number of provinces across Canada. So imagine being able to curate data on tens of thousands of patients relative to a 200 to 300 patient retrospective chart review, which is the norm today. So going back to the book, which has inspired us, Prediction Machines, his main thesis was do not look at technology in language and thinking around transformation or innovation. Look at the impact of technology in terms of how does it dramatically lower the cost of certain activities, and what's the impact on society when you dramatically lower the costs. And that is exactly how we approach our business and how we approach the very design of our technology, our AI stack, which is the benefit is not how do you get better at selecting potential participants for clinical trials. The benefit is how can AI, which is in its infancy, dramatically lower the cost to curate information about people. Because I'm sure right now, I gave the statistic, 80% of the health information we create isn't used to improve health outcomes. But we only have data on maybe 10% of the real world population, because the data we do have, for the most part, comes out of our clinical trial framework, which is incredible, mature, accurate, reputable. But when you start thinking about inclusion and exclusion criteria and who are those segments of the population, who's missing, and those are all the people that we don't know about today, because the cost to go through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these records is so tremendously high. And we're trying to change those very economics.
That's actually brilliantly said. So here we are just in a practical situation. I know you already have partnerships and you're actually doing some real world things with particular life science partners. But here, let's just say, for example, I'm pharmaceutical company X, and I'm planning to launch a new product, in a specific therapeutic space. Let's just say it's cancer. And, as part of the new process, a protocol, regulatory, market access, reimbursement, payers, everybody's asking for real world evidence. And again, this is the niche for Darwin, right? And also with what you're calling life-saving insight extraction. So if I was to approach Pentavere, what's our conversation going to look like? What are you going to say to me as a company with that particular problem set, that challenge? How are you going to help me solve what it is that I need to do?
Yeah. So the first sort of communication is, think of us as a CRO with all of the clinical competency and expertise that you would expect from a contract research organization to conduct research on your behalf, and a cutting edge, validated AI company merged together to offer a single solution to help solve the particular problem you just described. So let's pick lung cancer, for example. Let's pick lung cancer because out of all the solid tumor types, it impacts the most amount of patients. 60% of diagnoses are stage 3 or later, which means the mortality is so incredibly devastating. You get a lung cancer diagnosis and there's a high probability that you will be dead within a year, as devastating as that statement is. At the same time, the standard of care of lung cancer treatment is changing so dramatically, and there are so many new products on the market because of immunotherapy, which is essentially medications and treatments that manipulate your own immune system in order to fight the cancer. Now, these drugs are coming on market. They're asking for reimbursement, either first line or second line, but there's very little evidence. Now, why is there very little evidence? Because if you think about the patients in the real world, you've got desperate doctors, desperate patients trying a whole bunch of different therapies against a very tight clock to try to save that patient's life. None of that evidence today is available to the degree that it should. Patients with existing autoimmune diseases who are on different medications, who are taking a particular treatment, what are their outcomes? What's the difference in terms of first line, second line? We curate and accelerate the curation of that data to the same degree and same standards that you would expect a CRO to manually conduct a study. And we build
dramatically less time
into our technology and into our workflow. So the result and the impact of that is, I can tell you right now at a major center, we are processing 4,000 lung cancer patients. And we are going to be publishing data in the next 12 months that is going to have a big impact on different outcomes of different clusters of patients on various immunotherapies and what their patient journey is. There's an example of the incredible value that our clients are telling us we're delivering to them, but even more impactful than what our clients are telling us is the clinicians, the principal investigators who are on the front line every day trying to get these patients another month of life, trying to get these patients access to medications that are extremely expensive because it costs $1.5 billion to bring a single one of these treatments, which only works for a smaller and smaller subset of the population, to market. So if we can dramatically lower the cost of evidence generation, what we're actually doing is possibly changing the economics of access And that's one of our North Star aspirational goals.
So a lot of people are going to want to get their hands on this. Obviously, it's important to everybody, including the patient, the payer, the manufacturer, and everybody in between, because you're going to be saving a lot of hit and miss, trial and error, wasted money, ineffectiveness, and potentially, ultimately, death. So all very, very important parameters here that needs to be highly considered. So with all of that said, the question comes down to is, why isn't everybody doing this? Tell us a little bit about some of the objection, concerns, pushback that has been coming from industry. Is it, this is the way we've always done it? Or is this too good to be true? Or is it even issues around data surveillance, data privacy, security? What are why isn't every company doing this?
So I think everyone is in the process of doing something like this or trying to do something like this. You know, I think if you were to ask every pharmaceutical company, every hospital, they would tell you about initiatives they are doing in AI, in natural language processing, in real world evidence generation. So I don't think we are unique in the pursuit. What we do believe is we are unique in our approach, not based on what we think, but based on what our customers and clients are telling us, based on the feedback we're getting from some of the papers that are coming out, and just based on the level of work, scale of work, and scope of work that we are doing. We're at the very beginning of this change. AI, I've said it now 3 or 4 times and I bungle the word infancy, but we're at the very beginning of what the transformational impact of AI will be. And, you know, we don't know what other companies are working on. We don't know who will and who will not emerge successful, the same way as if you would have asked a group of very smart people in 2005 or 2006 if they would have predicted that the technology entrenched icons would be a Facebook, a Google, or an Amazon. None of those 3 companies would have been on the list. And I don't know who is going to be on that list that you're describing. What we do know is where we're different at Pentavere is, number one, we're not a venture-backed technology company. So we are not focused on product that generates a certain degree of repeatable recurring revenue in order to hit certain milestones based on our capital structure and capital need. And as a result of that, what makes us unique is, as much as we're talking about Darwin is our technology engine that solves the problem I described, but it's not a product yet. And we're have the opportunity of, based on the work we're doing in curation, collaborating with our clients based on that core capability, which is not to solve a business problem, but to solve what we think of as a societal problem. We're evolving with them around what are those various opportunities that would otherwise be products. And it's an incredible sort of evolution. So an example I can give that might be meaningful to you is, we had a client that said, the work you did getting this information out of electronic health records was incredible. We happen to be sitting on free text in our CRMs from all of our MSLs. If anything, we've actually started to restrict the commentary that they put in their CRM because we can't do anything with the information. But we have this going back years. And on top of that, we have all of the notes from all of our various ad boards. Some is transcriptions, some is just notes from the various participants. We think it is a treasure trove of critical insights that's sitting under our noses that we're just not doing anything with today? Can we run it through Darwin and see what comes out of it? All of a sudden, we are evolving, a service and a product for them specifically towards that end. So that's the type of growth when you take the mindset that we're at the very, very beginning of the journey. And we have no idea who will emerge as the big players. What we do know is we're 100% focused on why we're doing what we do, that it's ultimately about the patient outcomes, and it's ultimately about solving this curation problem around today. We manually pull this stuff out of records. It's very expensive. If we can think about dramatically lowering the cost to democratize this information, and we do good by our clients, we do good by our employees, we do good by all of our stakeholders every day, we'll be successful.
So tell us a little bit about the vision for that when we talk about the democratization of something so absolutely essential. And, for so many people involved, we've just talked about, for the payers, for the physicians, for the patients, for the manufacturers, and everybody can leverage Darwin to create their own individualized product or service that with what we call a use case that is useful for them. But let's just say theoretically right now, it seems like it's hard, or it's confusing, or it's technology and I know nothing about it. How do we start to enroll these particular individuals so that it becomes as easy and seamless as typing on a computer or clicking a button? Is that something that we see in the future? How are we going to create a seamless process? And again, is it licensed software? Is it something that just shows up in the electronic health record and you click a button and it suddenly gets gobbled up by the system that can then get processed through Darwin? And then, so how are people, what's the vision for this eventually for that democratization?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer. What I do know is healthcare is very, very different from other domains. The idea of move fast and break things, in healthcare, we can't afford to break things. More importantly, there are controls and standards and legislation in place to do everything possible to stop you from breaking things, because when you break things, people die. The second piece is privacy cannot just be an afterthought. It has to be at the very foundation, the very heart of what you do and how you design the workflow solution that you described. And I think that approach is somewhat unique and different from other scalable technology models that are out there. So where I think we've been successful is, number one, everybody we've come across, clinicians, pharmaceutical companies, they want to work in AI. They really want to be on the bleeding edge of solving some of these problems and working with technology to make things better. But they're also anchored, given its healthcare, in methodology is important, privacy is important, security is important. All of these things are important. So we say we're not going to lead with technology. Technology is just a tool to enable and accelerate what is happening today. So today, everybody will agree we need to understand what's happening within lung cancer patients in the real world. We need to understand that because the cost of some of these new drugs coming on the market could be as high as $6,000 a month, but it may be less than if a patient had to go through chemotherapy, multiple rounds of radiation, surgery, and how do you compare those outcomes? We don't have the data. So
just out of curiosity on that note, I'm just kind of curious about pharmaceutical companies, because we've gone to the days where there's the big blockbuster products. Everybody is now running towards, rare diseases, rare conditions, oncology. They're very niche. They're not blockbuster. They're not the big gigantic. The only way that they're getting basically the kind of revenues that they're looking for is the very, very high price associated with these very formidable types of technologies. Now we actually have enter Pentavere. And Pentavere has the ability to micro niche even further. So based on the evaluation and the information that your classifiers tag out, that this type of patient with X number of parameters, kind of listing them all out, are the ideal for this, and not this whole other echelon of patients. Is a part of that a concern to the typical pharmaceutical company or manufacturer, in terms of shooting themselves in the foot? On the one hand, yes, this is a great opportunity, we're going to get access, but on the other hand, my patient avatar or my clinical universe of potential entrants or patients is markedly smaller. Is this sort of the underlying white elephant in the room, the concern about these kinds of technologies moving forward for them?
So I think it depends. We're fortunate right now, we're working with, I'd say, 6 of the big 10 in an intimate way. And even amongst those 6, there's variability. Common themes is, I think everybody recognizes that the future of healthcare is personalized. The current state is not sustainable. Now, what's the solution towards that? There's a high degree of variability, but the idea around precision medicine, personalized healthcare, technology-enabled solutions, moving care out of the acute setting and in the community, and recognizing that there's a community of people around a patient that are just as important in determinants of outcome is more and more being recognized. The other thing I'm noticing being relatively new is a lot of the sort of transformation that many of our pharmaceutical clients are going through right now is very akin to the transformation when I started in consumer-facing businesses in the early 2000s, where if you think about retail, it was all about we buy things, we move things, we sell things. And then it says, well, hold on a second here. We have this thing called the internet coming. And we need to understand our customer. So it's about buying for him or her, understanding him or her, getting the right product at the right store at the right time, in the right channel, which means an intimate understanding of who that customer is. I'm finding all of the pharmaceutical companies we're working for, they're going through that transformation saying it's about the patient. It's no longer just about the customers, the person prescribing the particular treatment. They're an important stakeholder in care, but it's about the patient. And we need to go on our journey to understand these patients so we can collectively serve them better to maximize the health outcomes for them. Sure, how do we utilize the assets we have in our pipeline to achieve that objective? But there's a recognition of that sort of new anchoring culture. And to understand the patient, we are complex. We have complex histories, we have complex lifestyle choices, we have complex treatments. So there's a huge degree of complexity to understand that patient, but the information is all there. It's just in those clinical notes. It's in those unstructured documents that traditionally we have, stayed away from delving into. And, to sort of take a step back, where the name Pentavere came from, the word Pentavere is Latin for 5 truths, because we believe that goal that's very much aligned with the hospitals we work with, the health authorities we work with, the pharmaceutical companies we work with, is what is that truth between the dynamic between a patient, their physician, their disease, their treatment, their outcome. And you started this conversation saying insights come from conversations. Some of the most incredible aha moments we've seen when we presented data to the clinicians who are on the front line, those insights didn't come from the drop-down box in the EHR, but came from the conversations that they captured with their patients and transcribed or documented about who they are and therefore what their outcomes are, and then aggregating and making those clusters meaningful and impactful to solve a very specific problem.
Very exciting stuff. I love it. And absolutely see the application as it completely relates to the patient-centric movement, and around outcomes and really, all of those components that you've actually mentioned. I just want to spend a couple of minutes as I'm thinking again about prediction machines. And I remember reading when Avi Goldfarb was speaking around even the assessment and evaluation of how we manufacture knowledge in general and education. And we're thinking about the way this actually goes on today is the hundreds and thousands and millions of preprints and reprints and journal articles, and the way we sort of process knowledge. So not only what Pentavere is doing, but how Pentavere's data is inserting itself into this universe of data and information. So do you see a place at some point for Pentavere jumping into that, our ecosystem of information to start sorting and making sense of some of that that was really discussed in the Prediction Machines book about how can we process and package knowledge and information that's tossed out there in hundreds of different ways in something that's much more digestible and understandable?
So the answer is yes. The question is, how do we sequence our focus and activities to get and achieve that aspirational goal? And we have a saying internally that which we most need resides in the place we least want to go, which is like the hardest, most difficult, unstructured text being validated against the highest possible bar so it can be used for X. So that's very important in our own journey, which I would say is contrarian to move fast, scale quickly, or else your competition will take you out. And then it's about real problems. So I'll give you an example outside of cancer in terms of work we're really proud of. In major depressive disorders. So what's incredible is every day in Canada, and I was blown away when this statistic was shown to me, 200 people tried to commit suicide and 10 people succeed. So every day, 10 people take their own lives. And when you speak to the psychiatrists who are on the front line trying to understand major depressive disorder, and you start saying, okay, you've got a population of people suffering from major depressive disorder. Some people respond well to treatment, some people don't. Why? Of the people who don't respond well to treatment, some people try to commit suicide, some people don't. Why? And what I'm particularly interested in, I'm sharing sort of the scientists we're working in, is I want to be able to identify who are those patients, when you talk about making a prediction, who are those patients who are going to have the highest probability to commit suicide, because we can intervene and understand them upstream so such a catastrophic outcome doesn't happen. And if we can be a part of taking that number from 10 down to 7, and we're scaling that work with a client to the UK where the number is, I think, like 15 people a day or even higher, and you can make a sort of contribution to providing the evidence and the data just around that particular problem. That's how we want to make a dent. And we believe that if we box and are very specific, very impactful, very real, with publication, solving problems like that, or the work we're doing in breast cancer, or the work we're doing in leukemia, or in heart failure, and we create those little fires where it's not about AI as the lead, but it's about how AI can help change some of these outcomes by completely reimagining how we generate evidence and use that evidence to impact all of our processes, all of the way we do things. That's the sort of enormity of how we look at the problem. Yeah.
So it just on this, it's more ending this more in a philosophical question, because, at the end of the day, there's all kinds of viewpoints about AI, technology, living in the new normal, and just everything is kind of tossed in this big salad of tumult and potential, right? Of possibility at the same time. And, how you look at technology, it can be utopian, it can be dystopian, and it can be everything in between. And essentially the question always comes down to this: is everything in life predictable? Is there some components of life, of consciousness, of human beingness, of the human condition that one would remain somewhat unpredictable? Is there any component of that still remains in that realm that you don't think has a play for a Darwin, or that you think is better left being unkept?
So again, when I think about Darwin, the first step is just uncovering the information, that's buried today. Your question is one of the deepest philosophical questions of who we are, which is that tension point between the divinity of the individual constrained in the structure of the system, and how those two things interact. But how I would answer your question is to go back to, the answer may be no, but there's so much we don't understand today in healthcare that can make things better. And if we're sort of clear on that it's not about increasing the bottom line necessarily or improving the balance sheet, but it's in the belief that the same way cheap, plentiful, and available electricity dramatically changed the 20th century and created what we consider normal, which is really just a different sets of technology trade-offs, we're at the very beginning of what's possible in healthcare. And let's get a little further down the line to sort of have that conversation, because even in neuroscience, we're discovering things about the brain. And you're starting, in the work like Thinking Fast or Thinking Slow, or, Master and what's it called? There's a number of books out there recently just around what we're discovering because of AI, cheap, available, and plentiful computing power, that we're going to discover things about ourselves. And I would go as far to say our potential versus where we are today. That's really, really exciting. That's why I took the jump to leave the corporate world. And that's one of the things that drives us and guides us and hopefully makes us a little different from all the tumult that's in AI today, in terms of what we're hoping to achieve together with our customers, with our stakeholders, and with the patients that we ultimately serve.
Aaron, you're one of the most interesting people I've talked to, of many people I talk to. I could speak to you for hours about some of this stuff. I mean, I just did a Courageous Conversation spot on the Neuralink and all the possibilities, both philosophical and practical on that, but many, many more things. I think at the end of the day, extremely exciting things about Pentavere. I love the way you've articulated the solution, who you've partnered with. I think there's a lot of people who are going to be listening to this who are probably going to be clicking on the link below to find out more about you, to find out more about Pentavere. I certainly am very interested in the armamentarium of data that we have extracted over the last 12 years to discuss that with you as well. So really exciting stuff. For those of you who are interested, this is again one of the reasons we love doing this at Impetus, is that we really want to be the bridge, not only for the brand conversations that you're doing within our Impetus Insight platform using our asynchronous and synchronous tools, but to be able to elevate those discussions, to be able to talk about some of these really juicy, provocative topics. What does AI look like? What does, data lakes look like? What does the democratization and the development of these types of technologies as a utility in the future? How do we want to come to the table and change the business models in which we're functioning currently? How do we get away from these top line, bottom line, economic models and metrics to things around efficiency towards resiliency? So lots of really important topics that we would love to be the bridge for. So click on our link before if you're interested in finding out more about Impetus Digital. We want to thank everybody who's listening to this today. Thank you so much. And Aaron, an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. So I hope it's the first of many conversations between us. And thank you so much for your interest in the company.
Absolutely love it. Thank you so much and have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.